On January 13, 1919, in Plainfield, New Jersey, the youngest of 6 children. He grew up in a time when the world was recovering from one global conflict and heading toward another. Alan was an ordinary young man with an ordinary life, until December 7, 1941, when Japanese forces attacked Pearl Harbor. Like millions of Americans, McGee felt compelled to serve his country. He enlisted in the United States Army Air Forces immediately after the attack, hoping to become a pilot. However, fate had different plans. During his evaluation, recruiters noticed something particular about Alan McGee. He was small. Standing at just 5 feet 6 inches tall and weighing only 155 pounds, he wasn't selected for pilot training. But his compact stature made him perfect for one of the most dangerous and claustrophobic positions on a bomber crew, the ball turret gunner. For those unfamiliar with this position, the ball turret was a spherical plexiglass dome that hung beneath the belly of B-17 Flying Fortress bombers. It was incredibly cramped, so small that gunners often couldn't wear their parachutes inside. They'd leave them on the deck of the aircraft. The ball turret gunner would curl up in a fetal position, surrounded by 2.50 caliber machine guns, with nothing but a thin layer of plexiglass between them and the freezing air at 20,000 feet. It was one of the most exposed and vulnerable positions on the aircraft, and German fighters knew it. They often targeted ball turret gunners first. McGee's friend and fellow World War II veteran, Don Jenkins, later recalled that being a B-17 ball turret gunner was not an easy job. The casualty rate among these brave men was staggeringly high. But McGee accepted his assignment with courage and dedication. McGee was assigned to the 360th Bomb Squadron, 303rd Bomb Group, stationed at Molesworth in Cambridgeshire, England. His home in the sky was a B-17F Flying Fortress with an unusual name: Snap, Crackle, Pop. The bomber got its quirky name from its pilot, Captain Jacob Fredericks, who before the war had worked for the Kellogg Corporation, the makers of Rice Krispies cereal. The B-17 Flying Fortress was the backbone of America's daylight bombing campaign over Europe. This 4-engine heavy bomber was designed to fly high, carry a heavy bomb load, and protect itself with multiple gun positions. The aircraft earned its Flying Fortress nickname from the impressive array of defensive armaments it carried. Up to 13.50 caliber machine guns positioned throughout the aircraft. But despite its fearsome reputation and heavy armament, the B-17 was still vulnerable. German defenses were sophisticated and deadly. Anti-aircraft flak filled the skies with explosive shells that burst into thousands of metal fragments, capable of shredding aircraft and crew alike. And German fighter pilots were skilled, experienced, and determined to stop the Allied bombing campaign at any cost. By early January 1943, McGee had completed 6 missions. Each one was a journey into hell and back. The young ball turret gunner had already earned his place among the crew, proving his mettle under fire. But his 7th mission would be unlike anything he, or anyone else, could have imagined. January 3, 1943, dawned cold and gray over the English countryside. McGee and his crewmates prepared for another daylight bombing run. Their target: Saint-Nazaire, a heavily fortified port city on the Atlantic coast of Nazi-occupied France. The bomber crews had a grimmer nickname for it: Flak City. Saint-Nazaire wasn't just any target. It was home to a strategic U-boat base and dry dock facilities that the Germans used to repair and refit their submarines. These U-boats were wreaking havoc on Allied shipping in the Atlantic, sinking merchant vessels and threatening Britain's vital supply lines. Just a year earlier, in March 1942, British commandos had launched Operation Chariot, a daring raid that partially destroyed the dry dock. Now, American bombers were returning to finish the job, specifically targeting torpedo storage areas near the submarine pens. The mission briefing would have been sobering. The crews knew what awaited them over Saint-Nazaire. The Germans had concentrated massive anti-aircraft batteries around the port. The sky would be thick with exploding shells. And if they survived the flak, German fighter planes would be waiting to attack the bomber formations. 17 B-17s took off that morning, including Snap, crackle, pop. As they climbed to altitude and formed up, McGee squeezed into his ball turret, a routine he'd done 6 times before. The cramped sphere would be his world for the next several hours. He left his parachute on the deck above him. There simply wasn't room to wear it in the turret. As the formation droned across the English Channel toward France, tension mounted. Every man knew that not all of them would make it back. In fact, this particular mission would prove to be catastrophic for the 303rd Bomb Group. As the American bombers approached their target, all hell broke loose. The German anti-aircraft batteries opened up with devastating accuracy. The sky around the B-17s erupted in a storm of black smoke and orange flashes. Shrapnel sleet through the air like deadly rain. German fighters dove through the formations, their guns blazing. Inside his ball turret, McGee fired back at the attacking fighters, his twin .50 caliber machine guns hammering away. But then, disaster. A flak burst struck snap, crackle, pop, and McGee's ball turret was damaged, rendered inoperative. With his guns silent and his position compromised, McGee needed to get out. He rotated the turret to the access position and climbed back up into the aircraft's fuselage. He was heading toward the radio room when fate intervened with brutal force. Another flak shell exploded near the B-17, and this one found its mark. The blast tore off a large section of the bomber's right wing. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. With its aerodynamics destroyed, snap, crackle, pop, began to spin violently, spiraling toward the earth in what pilots called a graveyard spiral. The centrifugal force was tremendous. The aircraft was coming apart. Fire broke out. And at 22,000 feet, the air was desperately thin, containing only about half the oxygen available at sea level. McGee struggled in the chaos. The spinning was disorienting. The lack of oxygen was debilitating. He tried to reach his parachute, but according to some accounts, he discovered it had been damaged by shrapnel, torn and useless. Other accounts suggest he never made it to his parachute at all. As consciousness began to slip away due to oxygen deprivation, Alan McGee was thrown from the dying aircraft. The violent spinning and the exposed sections of the fuselage conspired to eject him into the freezing air, for miles above the earth. He was falling without a parachute, falling unconscious. His crewmates weren't so fortunate in some ways. 7 of them went down with the aircraft when it crashed into the La Balle Escaut Black Forest near Saint Nazaire. Only 3 crew members managed to bail out with parachutes. And then there was McGee, alone in the sky, plummeting toward what should have been certain death. Let's pause and consider the physics of what was happening to Alan McGee. From an altitude of 22,000 feet, that's 4.17 miles, or 6,700 meters, a human body in freefall will accelerate due to gravity until air resistance balances out the gravitational pull. This is called terminal velocity. For a person falling in a spread eagle position, terminal velocity is reached at around 120 miles per hour, or about 195 kilometers per hour. But McGee wasn't conscious to control his body position. He was a dead weight, falling through the thin, freezing air. At that altitude, the temperature would have been around minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit or Celsius. They converge at that point. The wind would have torn at his flight suit. His fall would take approximately 2 to 2.5 minutes, depending on various factors like his body position and the air density. Some accounts suggest McGee briefly regained consciousness during the fall. In these versions, he awoke to the horrifying realization that he was plummeting through the air, had a moment to pray for divine intervention, and then lost consciousness again from hypoxia, lack of oxygen to the brain. Whether conscious or not, Alan McGee was hurtling toward the earth at a speed that should have killed him instantly upon impact. The human body simply isn't designed to survive such forces. When someone falls from that height and hits solid ground, the sudden deceleration, going from 120 miles per hour to 0 in a fraction of a second, creates forces that tear apart organs, shatter bones, and rupture blood vessels. It's why falls from such heights are almost universally fatal. But fate, it seems, had other plans for Sergeant McGee. Below, in the city of Saint-Nazaire, sat the town's railway station. It was a typical French provincial train station with one particular architectural feature that would prove to be the difference between death and survival: a large glass skylight roof. As McGee plummeted through the air, his trajectory brought him directly toward this railway station. At over 120 miles per hour, he crashed through the glass roof. This is where the miracle happened. The glass roof didn't simply give way all at once. Instead, it shattered progressively as McGee's body impacted it. Each pane of glass that broke absorbed some of his kinetic energy. The metal framework of the roof structure also bent and flexed, further dissipating the energy of impact. Some accounts suggest the slope of the roof caused McGee to slide as he crashed through, which would have helped to spread out the deceleration over a longer time period rather than an instantaneous stop. In physics terms, what the glass roof did was increase the time over which McGee's momentum changed. The longer the time period, the lower the force. It's the same principle that makes airbags effective in car crashes. They extend the time of deceleration, reducing the peak force. The Mythbusters television show actually tested the scenario during their 4th season, trying to determine if falling through a glass roof could actually save someone from a fall of this magnitude. They were skeptical and ultimately deemed the scenario implausible under their test conditions. However, their test setup couldn't perfectly replicate all the variables of McGee's actual fall. The specific construction of that particular glass roof, the angle of impact, McGee's body position, and perhaps other factors we don't fully understand. What we do know is this: when German soldiers found Alan McGee inside the Saint-Nazaire train station, he was alive. Suspended on a steel girder, surrounded by shattered glass, bleeding from dozens of wounds, but alive. The injuries McGee sustained were catastrophic, yet somehow not fatal. The German soldiers who discovered him must have been astonished to find any signs of life. They quickly transported him to a first aid station, where he regained consciousness. According to accounts, McGee's first words upon waking were simple and profound: "Thank God I am alive." The extent of his injuries was staggering. He had suffered 28 shrapnel wounds, some from the flak that hit the B-17, others from the broken glass of the roof. He had several broken bones, including his right leg and ankle. His face had been severely damaged. His nose was broken, and he had significant injuries to his eye. Internally, he had a punctured lung and kidney damage. Most seriously, his right arm was nearly severed. Hanging on by what must have been tendons and tissue, the bone completely shattered. By all rights, Alan McGee should have died multiple times that day. From the flak from being thrown from an aircraft at 22,000 feet, from the fall itself, or from his injuries afterward. Instead, he was taken to a German hospital. And here, another remarkable part of this story emerges. The German military doctor who treated McGee demonstrated the kind of humanity that sometimes shone through even in the darkness of war. McGee later recalled the doctor's words: "We are enemies, but I am first a doctor, and I will do my best to save your arm." True to his word, the German physician performed surgery and managed to save McGee's arm, a feat of medical skill that was particularly impressive given the severity of the damage and the circumstances. The doctor's name was never recorded, or at least McGee never learned it, but the young airman never forgot the compassion shown to him by this enemy physician. After his treatment and initial recovery, McGee was transported to Stalag Luft 17B, a prisoner of war camp where he would spend the remainder of the war. He was accompanied by 2 other survivors from various missions. Life as a POW was harsh, but McGee had already survived the impossible. He spent the next 2 years and 4 months in captivity, slowly recovering from his injuries. The German camp had basic medical facilities, and McGee gradually regained strength, though he would carry the scars, both physical and psychological, for the rest of his life. During this time, according to some accounts, when German interrogators questioned McGee about his miraculous survival, he claimed to have no memory of what happened. Whether this was truth or a deliberate strategy to avoid detailed interrogation is unclear. The trauma of the experience, the battle, the fall, the impact, could certainly have caused genuine memory loss. Or perhaps McGee simply saw no reason to satisfy his captor's curiosity. What must have gone through his mind during those long months of captivity? Did he wonder why he survived when 7 of his crewmates didn't? Did he think about the impossible odds he had beaten? Did he dream about the fall? Finally, in May 1945, as Allied forces swept across Germany and the Nazi regime collapsed, Alan McGee was liberated. He returned home to a world that had changed almost as much as he had. For his service and his ordeal, the United States military awarded Alan McGee the Air Medal for Meritorious Conduct and the Purple Heart for wounds received in action. These decorations were well-deserved, though no medal could truly capture what he had endured. But here's something interesting about Alan McGee. He didn't seek fame for his incredible story. After the war, he rarely discussed his ordeal. He didn't give interviews or seek publicity. He simply got on with his life. McGee earned his pilot's license, fulfilling that original dream from when he first enlisted. He worked in the airline industry in various capacities, staying connected to the world of aviation that had nearly killed him. In 1979, he retired and moved to northern New Mexico with his wife, Helen, seeking peace in the Southwest's vast landscapes. For decades, his story was known mainly among military historians and aviation enthusiasts. It was featured in the Smithsonian Magazine as one of the 10 most amazing survival stories of World War II, but McGee himself remained largely out of the spotlight. Then, on January 3, 1993, exactly 50 years after that fateful mission, something remarkable happened. The people of Saint-Nazaire, France, erected a memorial to honor Alan McGee and the crew of Snap, Crackle, Pop. The monument stood 6 feet tall, a permanent reminder of the sacrifice of the 7 men who died when the bomber crashed in La Balle-Escoublac Forest, and a testament to the miraculous survival of the one who fell through the sky. In September 1995, at age 76, Alan McGee made an emotional journey back to Saint-Nazaire. Accompanied by his wife Helen, he participated in a ceremony sponsored by French citizens to commemorate the events of January 3, 1943. Imagine what that trip must have meant to him. Returning to the place where he should have died. Walking through the streets of a city he had only seen from 4 miles up as he fell unconscious through the sky. Meeting the people of a town that had been under Nazi occupation when he crashed through their railway station roof. During his visit, McGee toured the city. He went to the hotel where the German doctor had treated his injuries, a building that, for him, represented humanity in the midst of inhumanity. He visited the submarine pens and harbor that had been his bombing target so many years earlier. And finally, he went to the railway station. The glass roof that had saved his life had long since been repaired or replaced, but the station itself remained. Standing there, looking up at that roof, what thoughts went through his mind? Did memories flood back? Did he feel a connection to that terrified, unconscious 23-year-old who had crashed through the glass more than 5 decades earlier? The people of Saint-Nazaire didn't just honor him as a former enemy airman who bombed their city. They recognized him as a symbol of human resilience, of the inexplicable moments when fate seems to intervene. They made him a citizen of honor, a remarkable gesture of reconciliation and respect. So how did Alan McGee actually survive? Let's examine the factors that had to align perfectly for this miracle to occur. First, there's the glass roof itself. Modern safety glass is designed to shatter in a specific way, but the glass in that 1940s railway station would have been different, likely thicker panes of ordinary glass. When McGee hit it, the progressive breaking of multiple panes of glass, combined with the bending of the metal framework, extended the time of impact. Instead of hitting solid concrete, where deceleration would be nearly instantaneous, McGee's body had perhaps a half-second or more of deceleration time. That fraction of a second made all the difference. Second, McGee was unconscious. This might have actually helped him. When people are conscious during a fall, they tend to tense up, and tense muscles are more prone to injury. An unconscious person is completely relaxed, which allows bones and joints to move more freely upon impact, potentially reducing the concentration of force at any single point. Third, His body position upon impact matters. We don't know exactly how McGee was oriented when he hit the roof, but certain positions are more survivable than others. Landing flat, distributing the force across a larger area, is generally better than landing feet first or head first. Fourth, there's an element we can't quantify: sheer luck. The fact that his trajectory brought him to that train station at that angle, hitting the roof in just the right way, the odds were astronomical. Vesna Vulovic, a Serbian flight attendant, holds the Guinness World Record for surviving the highest fall without a parachute. 33,330 feet in 1972 when her aircraft broke up over Czechoslovakia. She landed in a snow-covered, forested ravine, and the trees and snow helped cushion her fall. Other people have survived extraordinary falls, but the common thread is always some mechanism that extends the time of deceleration. Snow, trees, sloped surfaces, or in McGee's case, a glass roof. Alan Eugene McGee died on December 20, 2003, in San Angelo, Texas. He was 84 years old, having lived 60 years beyond that day when he fell from the sky. The cause of death was stroke and kidney failure, perhaps related to the injuries he'd sustained during the war, or perhaps simply the natural end of a long life. He left behind a legacy that extends far beyond his miraculous survival. His story reminds us of the incredible sacrifices made by the young men who flew in those bombers over Europe, the greatest generation, as they've been called. Every mission was a roll of the dice. Every time they climbed into those aircraft, they knew they might not come back. The 303rd Bomb Group alone suffered heavy losses throughout the war. On that single mission to St. Nazaire on January 3, 1943, the overall Allied force lost 75 airmen. 7 planes went down, and 47 more were badly damaged. It was considered a failed mission despite the bombs that were dropped. The cost was simply too high. But from that failed mission came one of the most inspiring survival stories of the entire war. Alan McGee's fall and survival gave hope to others, demonstrated the unpredictability of fate, and showed that sometimes, against all odds, miracles do happen.